On Christmas morning, I woke up alone in my cold house. My son had left without saying a word. My wheelchair was locked right beside the door. The refrigerator was almost empty. Then the door suddenly opened. My granddaughter walked in carrying a bowl of hot soup and a small USB drive, looking at me with calm eyes. She said, "Shall we begin?" I smiled and nodded. 1 week later, my son came home, and he started screaming, "So glad to have you at Dad's Revenge Stories. Tell me in the comments, which country or city are you watching this from?" Quick note: this story incorporates some fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Resemblances to actual names or locations are strictly coincidental, but the message speaks for itself. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the soft, comfortable silence of a house still sleeping where someone might be breathing quietly in the next room or coffee might start brewing in 20 minutes. This was different. This was the silence of a house that had decided sometime in the night that it was done with me. I am George Harrison. I am 74 years old. I spent 31 years building ships at New Haven Harbor, and I have weathered nor'easters that bent steel beams and tide surges that swallowed whole docks whole. I have buried my wife. I have rebuilt from nothing twice. And on the morning of December 24th, 2024, I lay in my bed in the house I paid for with my own hands and listened to the silence and understood exactly what it meant. Brandon was gone. I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand. My hand closed around air. The nightstand was bare. No water, no medications, no phone. The small lamp I kept there since Eleanor died, the one with the cream-colored shade she picked out at a shop in Mystic back in 2003, was gone too. Moved. Or taken. I would find out which soon enough. Getting into my wheelchair used to be a matter of seconds. Grip the armrest, swing my legs over, lower myself down. Simple enough for a man who once hauled anchor chain by hand. But when I turned toward the spot where my chair sat every single morning, for the past 4 years I found it locked. A small metal pin had been inserted through the wheel spokes, and the frame the kind of cheap bicycle lock you could buy at any hardware store for $8. It was not a sophisticated device. It was a deliberate one. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment and looked at that lock. I was not afraid. I wanted to be clear about that. There was a version of this moment where a 74-year-old man in a house alone on Christmas morning might panic, might shout, might cry out for help that was not coming. That version of me might have existed once. Not anymore. I gripped the bedpost and pulled myself to standing, held the wall with my left hand, and moved slowly down the hallway toward the kitchen. My legs were stiff from the cold, and the cold was real because the thermostat had been turned down to 58 degrees, low enough to make my knuckles ache and my breath show faint in the air. Someone had done that deliberately too. The kitchen was the first place that showed me the full picture. The refrigerator held half a carton of eggs, 1 container of plain yogurt 3 days from its expiration date, and a stick of butter. On the counter, pushed to the very back corner where I could not reach it from a wheelchair, sat my blood pressure medication and my cholesterol pills. Both bottles full. Both positioned exactly 10 inches higher than my reach when seated. I stood there in the cold kitchen in my socks and my flannel pajamas, and I looked at those bottles, and I felt something move through my chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived somewhere in the dark territory between the two. On the kitchen table was a single sheet of yellow legal paper folded once. I unfolded it. Brandon's handwriting. Quick, slanted, efficient. The handwriting of a man who had somewhere more important to be. Dad. Diana and I are in Aspen through January 2nd. Meds are on the counter. Food in the fridge. Call if you need anything. No phone number. The family landline, the one mounted on the kitchen wall that I had used for 22 years, displayed a new screen I had never seen before. A 4-digit passcode. Someone had changed it. There was no cell phone within my reach. The one Brandon had set up for me 2 years ago was not on its charger by the microwave where it lived every single day. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. Then I walked slowly and carefully into the living room. In 31 years of marriage, Eleanor and I had covered these walls with photographs. Our wedding in '68, a young couple standing in front of St. Michael's Church in New Haven, Eleanor in her mother's dress. Brandon at age 3 on the Cape Cod beach laughing at a wave. The four of us, Eleanor and me and Brandon and his cousin Stella at Stella's nursing school graduation in 2015. The photograph from the year we celebrated our 40th anniversary, at the restaurant on the water in Guilford, Eleanor wearing the blue dress she loved. Every single photograph was gone. The walls were bare except for 3 large framed prints I had never seen before. Abstract, expensive-looking, cold. I stood in the center of that living room and understood what Brandon had done. He had not merely left me alone. He had begun slowly and methodically to erase me from my own home, to replace the evidence of my life with the decoration of his ambition. The photographs were gone. The warmth was gone. Even the smell of the house was different. Something artificial and sharp, a candle or a diffuser Diana favored, covering the old familiar smell of wood smoke, and the cedar chest Eleanor kept by the stairs. I moved to the window. Outside, a light snow was beginning to fall over Greenwich. The kind of snow that comes on Christmas morning in Connecticut, as though the sky remembers what the day is supposed to feel like, quiet and pale and covering everything in white. The maple tree in the front yard, the one I planted the year Brandon was born, stood bare and patient in the cold. 74 years, I said to myself, and it comes down to this. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the front porch. Slow and deliberate crunching through the thin layer of snow. Someone was walking up the path to my front door. The front door opened with the sound I had heard 10,000 times in my life. The particular groan of old hinges that Eleanor always said needed oiling, and that I never got around to fixing because, truthfully, I liked the sound. It meant someone was home. Stella came through the door, carrying a paper bag in one arm and a canvas tote over her shoulder, snow melting off her dark coat in small wet patches. She was 31 years old, and she had her grandmother's eyes, that specific shade of brown that caught light and held it. She looked at me, standing in the middle of the living room, one hand on the wall, and she did not flinch, and she did not gasp. She just set everything down on the entry table, crossed the room in 4 steps, and put both arms around me. She smelled like cold air and chicken broth, and something familiar I could not immediately name. "I've got you, Grandpa," she said into my shoulder. "I've got you." I held on to her for a moment longer than I meant to. Then I cleared my throat and stepped back. "You're letting the cold in," I said. She laughed a short, real laugh and went back to close the door. "You haven't changed." 74 years of consistency, I said. "Some people call it stubbornness." She picked up the paper bag and carried it to the kitchen. I followed, one hand trailing the wall. She did not offer to help me walk, and I did not ask her to. That was one of the things I had always loved about Stella. She understood the difference between helping someone and diminishing them. In the kitchen, she surveyed the refrigerator, the bare counter, the medication bottles pushed to the back. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she set the soup container on the stove and turned the burner on low and began unpacking the canvas tote. A loaf of sourdough bread from the bakery on Chapel Street, a container of mixed greens, 2 apples, a bar of dark chocolate, 70% cacao, the kind Eleanor used to keep in the cabinet above the stove. You remembered, I said. She glanced over her shoulder. Eleanor told me once that dark chocolate was the only luxury you ever allowed yourself. She set it on the counter beside the bread. I figured you could use some luxury today. I sat down at the kitchen table. Outside, the snow was falling steadily now, covering the front walk, softening the edges of the yard. The kitchen was warming up. Stella had found the thermostat in the hallway and turned it back to 68 without being asked. How did you know? I said. She stirred the soup and did not answer right away. That was also something I had always loved about her. She did not fill silence with noise. She thought before she spoke. 2 weeks ago, she said finally. I was going through some old emails on my laptop. I have a shared folder with Brandon from years back when we were coordinating Eleanor's funeral arrangements. He never removed me from it. She kept her eyes on the pot. Brandon was always careless about things he considered beneath his attention. Digital housekeeping, small details. He assumed I had forgotten the folder existed. He was wrong. My chest tightened. What did you find? She turned off the burner and ladled soup into 2 bowls, set them on the table, sat down across from me. She wrapped both hands around her bowl and looked at me directly. I found everything, Grandpa, she said. Every email, every plan, every name. I looked down at the soup. Chicken with wide egg noodles and carrots and celery, the kind of soup that takes 4 hours to make properly. She had made this soup for me. Start from the beginning, I said. She reached into her coat pocket and set a small USB drive on the table between us. Matte black, no larger than my thumb. Brandon has been meeting with an attorney named Gerald Marsh, a notary named Philip Corso, and a psychiatrist named Dr. Howard Bellamy, she said. The emails go back 11 weeks. Brandon is filing a petition for full financial conservatorship over you. That means a court would give him legal authority to control every financial decision you make, every asset you own, every account with your name on it. She paused. He's arguing that you are no longer mentally competent to manage your own affairs. The soup steamed between my hands. The $15,000, I said. Her eyes sharpened. You knew about the money. I noticed it was gone 3 weeks ago. I assumed it was for something legitimate. I lifted my spoon and set it down again. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Stella's jaw tightened, and I watched something move across her face. Something controlled and careful, the way she managed emotion, the same way she managed everything else with precision and intention. He used your own money to pay the attorney retainer, the notary fees, and Dr. Bellamy's evaluation costs, she said. He paid for the case against you with your own savings. The kitchen was very quiet, except for the wind outside and the settling of the old house around us. Stella, I said, I need to ask you something. Anything. Did you come here to rescue me? She looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly she shook her head. No, Grandpa, she said. I came here because you already knew, and because you needed someone to begin with. She picked up the USB drive and set it in the center of the table between our 2 bowls of soup. So, shall we begin? I reached out and picked up the drive. It was small and light in my palm. It felt nothing like the weight it carried. I looked at my granddaughter across the table in the warm kitchen of the house I built on a Christmas Eve that was supposed to break me. Yes, I said. Let's begin. Stella set her laptop on the kitchen table after we finished the soup, angled the screen toward me and said, I'm going to show you the first email. Tell me when you're ready. I folded my hands on the table. I'm ready. The email was dated November 4th, 11 weeks ago. I had been sitting in this kitchen 11 weeks ago drinking my morning coffee while my son was typing this. Gerald, attached are the preliminary financial documents as discussed. My father's primary accounts are Wells Fargo checking and a Vanguard investment account. Combined balance approximately $412,000. There is also the matter of the New Haven property, which I believe is significantly undervalued on his current estate paperwork. I need the conservatorship petition filed before the new year. My father's mental state has been declining for months. Dr. Bellamy has agreed to conduct the evaluation the week of December 16th. Let me know what else you need from my end. Brandon. I read it twice. Then I sat back in my chair. He calls it the New Haven property, I said. Stella looked at me carefully. You mean the shipyard? 31 years I worked that land, I said. Built my first dry dock with borrowed money and a crew of 7 men. Brandon has been to that yard exactly once in his life. He was 16. He stood at the gate and said it smelled like rust and sweat and asked if we could leave. I paused. He calls it the New Haven property. Grandpa. Stella touched my arm. There's more. She scrolled to the next email. This one was from Dr. Howard Bellamy, dated November 19th, responding to Brandon. Mr. Harrison, I've reviewed the behavioral documentation you provided. Based on the patterns described, I believe we have sufficient grounds to support a finding of diminished capacity. I can conduct the formal evaluation on December 17th as scheduled. Please ensure your father is in a calm environment that day and has not been coached or prepared in any way. The evaluation should appear routine to him. H. Bellamy, M.D. The words "appear routine to him" sat on the page like something dirty. He scheduled the evaluation for December 17th, I said. That was a Tuesday. Stella, do you remember what happened on December 17th? She shook her head slowly. Brandon came home early from work. He made dinner, pasta with marinara sauce, the kind I like. He poured me a glass of wine, which he never does, and he sat across from me and asked about the old days. About the shipyard, about your grandmother, about what it was like when he was a boy. I looked at my hands on the table. I thought he was having a good day. I thought maybe something had shifted between us. I talked for 2 hours. Stella's expression tightened into something that looked like controlled fury. He was softening you up for the evaluation the next morning. The next morning, Dr. Bellamy came to the house. I said. Brandon introduced him as a wellness consultant, doing a routine checkup for my insurance. We talked for 45 minutes. He asked me what year it was, who the president was, to count backward from 100 by sevens. I exhaled slowly. I answered everything correctly. He shook my hand and left. Brandon walked him out, and they spoke on the porch for several minutes. I know, Stella said. She pulled up another email dated December 18th, the day Brandon left for Aspen. Gerald Bellamy's preliminary findings support the petition. We're moving forward. I'll be out of town through the 31st, but available by phone. The house will be quiet. My father will be alone. The house will be quiet. My father will be alone. I read that line 3 times. Something moved through my chest, a slow and heavy pressure, the way a wave feels before it breaks all weight and no sound. He planned the timing deliberately, I said. Christmas week, the house empty, no witnesses. If something happened to me, it would be hours before anyone knew. The lock on your wheelchair, Stella said quietly. The medication's out of reach. The phone passcode. None of that was careless, Grandpa. Every single thing was calculated. I stood up from the table. Not quickly, not dramatically. I just needed to be standing. I moved to this kitchen window and looked out at the dark yard, the snow still falling, the maple tree standing patient and bare in the cold. I had planted that tree the year Brandon was born, 1982. I dug the hole myself with a spade and a pair of work gloves, and I remember thinking this tree will be here long after I am. Something for him to come back to. Why are you telling me all of this tonight? I asked. You could have waited until morning. Because you needed to know before tomorrow, Stella said. And because there's one more email. The last one in the chain. She paused. You need to read it yourself. I turned from the window and walked back to the table. Stella moved the laptop toward me. The email was short. 4 lines. Brandon to Gerald Marsh, sent December 23rd. Yesterday. Gerald, everything is in place. By the time I return on the 31st, the petition should be ready to file. Once the court grants conservatorship, the New Haven property transfers to my management authority immediately. The old man won't see it coming. The old man. I closed the laptop carefully. I did not slam it. I did not raise my voice. I sat in the warm kitchen my wife had loved in the house I had built, and I breathed steadily until the pressure in my chest found somewhere to settle. Stella, I said. Yes. Does he know about the shipyard, the real value of it, the offer from Meridian Energy? She shook her head. He has no idea. I nodded slowly. A long, quiet moment passed between us, the kind that does not need filling. Good, I said at last. Then he doesn't know what he's really after. I did not sleep well that night, but I did not expect to. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around me. The old familiar creaks of wood contracting in the cold, the whisper of wind coming off Long Island Sound and moving through the maple branches outside my window. These were sounds I had known for 40 years. They had never frightened me. Even now, knowing what I knew, they did not frighten me. They only made me think of Eleanor the way she used to say, "This house breathes like a living thing." George and I used to tell her that was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard, and she would laugh and say that was precisely why she loved me. I was awake before 5. By the time Stella came downstairs at 7, I had already made coffee, found the bag of ground beans she had brought in her canvas tote the night before, and set 2 mugs on the kitchen table. She came in wearing thick socks and an old sweater, her hair still loose, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw the coffee waiting. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I've been making coffee since before you were born," I said. "Sit down." She sat. We drank in the quiet of Christmas morning, the snow outside bright and undisturbed, the yard looking the way it always looked on December 25th when Eleanor was alive, as though the whole world had decided to hold still for one day. "Tell me about the shipyard," Stella said. I wrapped both hands around my mug. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard, a hard red against all that white. Eleanor used to say cardinals were messages from people who had gone ahead of us. I never believed that. But I always looked when one appeared. "I bought the first parcel of land at New Haven Harbor in 1989, I said. I was 39 years old. I had $11,000 saved, and I borrowed $22,000 more from a bank in Bridgeport that gave loans to small commercial operators. The land was cheap because nobody wanted it. Industrial waterfront contaminated soil from a paint manufacturer that had gone under in '81. Everyone said I was throwing money into the harbor. But you weren't, Stella said. I knew what the harbor would become, I said. Not the specifics, not the energy companies or the development plans. But I knew that waterfront land in Connecticut does not stay cheap forever. So I cleaned the soil myself, hired a remediation crew for 2 summers, and I built a dry dock on the first parcel. Then I bought the parcel next to it. Then the next. I set my mug down. By 2003, I owned 6 contiguous acres of working waterfront. Your grandmother thought I was obsessed. She was right. Stella smiled. She told me once that you used to drive to the harbor at 6 in the morning just to walk the perimeter. Every Sunday for 20 years, I said. Eleanor packed me a thermos and never once complained about it. That was the kind of woman she was. I paused. Brandon came to the yard once. 1998. He was 16. I remember standing at the edge of the first dry dock I had ever built, watching my son look around at everything Eleanor and I had sacrificed for, and waiting for something to register on his face. He lasted 10 minutes before he asked if we could leave. I picked up my mug. I never brought him back, and I never stopped wondering if I should have tried harder. Stella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did it hurt that he wasn't interested?" I thought about that honestly. At the time, no. Boys of 16 are not interested in their father's work. I assumed he would come around. I looked out at the cardinal still on the fence post. He never did, and I stopped assuming. "When did you decide to stay in the wheelchair?" she asked. The question was direct the way Stella always was, no softening around the edges, just the thing itself. I had been waiting for her to ask. Dr. Alan Pierce told me in the spring of 2021 that with 6 months of intensive physical therapy, I had a strong chance of recovering full mobility, I said. My injury was significant, but not irreversible. He was cautiously optimistic, which from Alan means genuinely confident. Stella set her mug down carefully. "Grandpa, yet I told Alan I needed time to consider," I said. And then I watched Brandon for 3 weeks. I watched how he spoke to me when he thought I could not get out of the chair. How Diana scheduled my medications around her own convenience. How Brandon talked about me on the phone when he believed I was asleep. I folded my hands on the table. I decided I needed to know the truth, not the version of my son that existed when he thought I might recover. The real version. The one that appeared when he believed I was permanently diminished. "And now you know," Stella said. "Now I know," I said. She reached across the table and covered my hands with hers. Her hands were warm from the coffee mug, and they were steady, the hands of someone who had spent years caring for people who needed steadiness. "Grandpa," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Always. Are you ready to stand up?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I pushed back from the table, placed both palms flat on the surface, and rose to my feet. Slowly, deliberately. The way I had done it every night in this kitchen for the past 3 years when no one was watching. This was the first time I had done it in front of another person. I stood straight, all 6 feet of me, and looked down at my granddaughter. Her eyes filled, though she did not let the tears fall. "Close your mouth, sweetheart," I said quietly. "We still have work to do." The doorbell rang at 10 minutes past 10 on the morning of December 26th, and I knew before I reached the hallway who it would be. Margaret Collins had lived in the white colonial next door for 32 years. She and Eleanor had shared a fence line, a love of dahlias, and an inexhaustible supply of opinions about everything from the best clam chowder in New Haven County to the proper way to hang Christmas lights. When Eleanor died in 2019, Margaret had shown up at my door the morning after the funeral with a pot of beef stew and stayed for 4 hours without either of us saying very much at all. That was the kind of woman she was. She understood that presence was its own language. Stella opened the door. Margaret stood on the porch in her long wool coat, the navy one with the brass buttons she had owned since at least 2007, and she was holding a small notebook pressed against her chest with both hands, The way a person holds something they are not entirely sure they should be giving away. George, she said, looking past Stella at me. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were doing something complicated. I've been waiting for the right moment to bring this over. I think the right moment is now. Come in, Margaret, I said. Stella just made coffee. She came inside, accepted the coffee, declined the chair Stella offered, and then sat down in it anyway, 30 seconds later, which was very Margaret. She set the notebook on the table between us. It was small, maybe 5 inches by 7, with a cloth cover the color of dark moss. The kind of notebook you could buy at any drugstore for $3. The edges were soft with handling. I want you to know something before you open that, she said, both hands wrapped around her mug. I am not a spy. I am not a gossip. I am a 78-year-old woman who has lived next door to you for 32 years and who loved your wife like a sister. And what I am about to show you, I wrote down because I was afraid that if I didn't write it down, nobody would ever believe me. She looked at me steadily. Including you. I reached out and opened the notebook. The first entry was dated March 14, 2022. Margaret's handwriting was small and precise. The handwriting of a woman who had been a school librarian for 26 years and still believed that penmanship mattered. Heard raised voices from George's house again this evening, approximately 7:30. Brandon's voice, not distinguishable words, but the tone unmistakable. Checked from my kitchen window. George's bedroom light on. No one went in or came out for 2 hours. I turned the page. April 2nd. Diana turned away the home health aide at the door this morning. The woman, older gray coat, stood on the porch for several minutes. Diana spoke to her briefly and closed the door. The aide left. I do not believe George knew she was there. I turned another page, and another. Entry after entry, dates stretching across nearly 3 years. Brandon arriving home late and loud. The regular aide being replaced with someone younger who arrived irregularly and left early. My bedroom light burning until past midnight, on nights when I now understood I had been unable to reach the lamp switch from my chair. Then I reached the entry dated June 18, 2023. My birthday. George's birthday today. I baked the lemon pound cake Eleanor used to make and brought it to the door at noon. Diana answered. She said George was resting and couldn't have visitors. She took the cake. I watched from my front window at 6 in the evening. Brandon and Diana left the house together dressed for dinner. George's bedroom light came on at 7 and stayed on until nearly 11. I watched from my kitchen. He sat by the window for a long time. I should have gone over. I will never forgive myself for not going over. I had to stop reading. The kitchen was very quiet. Stella had her hand over her mouth. Margaret was looking at her coffee mug, her jaw tight, giving me the privacy of not being watched. Margaret, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. I know, she said. You watched from your kitchen. Well, I did. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were bright with something fierce and sad at the same time. And I told myself you were fine, that families have difficult moments, that it wasn't my place. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard. I was a coward, George. I was a coward, and I am sorry, and I will spend the rest of my life being sorry. Margaret. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You're here now. She turned her hand over and gripped mine hard, the grip of someone who had been waiting a long time to hold on to something solid. Stella cleared her throat gently. Mrs. Collins, there was something you mentioned on the phone about a license plate. Margaret straightened, released my hand, and reached into her coat pocket. She produced a folded piece of paper, creased precisely in thirds, and set it on the table beside the notebook. Last Tuesday, December 17th, a man I had never seen before parked in front of your house, George. He sat in the car for 10 minutes before he got out. He walked around the side of the property, looked at the fence line, took photographs on his phone. She tapped the folded paper. I wrote down the plate number, Connecticut registration, dark blue sedan, late model Honda. Stella unfolded the paper, looked at it, and her expression went very still in the way it did when something important clicked into place. "This matches the plate Danny Parker gave us," she said quietly, looking at me. "Who is Danny Parker?" Margaret asked. "Someone who has been watching the shipyard," I said. "Someone Brandon sent to take photographs there the same week he sent someone here." Margaret looked between us. "He was covering both ends at once." "Yes," I said. "He was." Margaret left at 11:30, and the house felt different after she was gone. Fuller, somehow. As though her honesty had occupied a space that had been empty for a long time. Stella washed the coffee mugs while I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the notebook Margaret had left behind. She had not taken it with her. That was deliberate. She wanted it to stay in this house in my hands where it belonged. "Grandpa," Stella said, drying her hands on the dish towel Eleanor had embroidered with small blue anchors, a Christmas gift from 1994 that I had never once considered replacing. "Can I ask you something?" "You've been asking me things for 2 days," I said. "Don't stop now." She sat down across from me. "The $3,000 a month, your Social Security and your pension. Brandon has been managing that since your accident. What did you actually see of it?" I looked at my hands on the table. $200 a month, I said. Cash in an envelope left on my nightstand on the first of every month. Brandon called it spending money. Stella's expression did not change dramatically. She had the controlled face of someone who had already processed her anger privately and arrived at this conversation on the other side of it. But her knuckles wrapped around the edge of the table went white. $200, she said. $200, I confirmed. For toiletries, for the occasional book, for anything I wanted that was not covered by what Brandon deemed necessary. I paused. He deemed very little necessary. And you never questioned it. I questioned it once, I said. In the spring of 2022. I asked Brandon for an accounting of my accounts, a simple statement showing income and expenditures. He told me it was complicated, that there were tax considerations, that he was managing everything, and I should trust him. I looked at her steadily. He had a power of attorney I had signed in 2020 when I was still in the hospital after my accident. At the time, I thought I was making a practical decision. I was in pain, and I trusted my son, and I signed the document. I exhaled slowly. A power of attorney gives the holder legal authority to act on the grantor's behalf in financial matters. Brandon used that authority to consolidate control over every account with my name on it. He was never supposed to keep the money, Stella said. A POA is a management tool, not a license to take. Correct, I said. What Brandon did constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty under Connecticut law. The person holding a power of attorney is legally required to act in the best interest of the grantor, not their own. He did not do that. I paused. But I could not prove it until Stella found the bank statements in that email chain. She nodded. Victor can use those statements directly. Victor already has them, I said. Stella looked at me with something that might have been admiration if she had been the type to show it plainly. She was not. She was Eleanor's kind of person, the kind who expressed approval through continued engagement rather than compliment. "Tell me about the caregivers," she said. I sat back. When I first came home from the hospital, Brandon hired a woman named Rose Kavanaugh. 60 years old, 20 years of experience with post-surgical patients, excellent references from Greenwich Hospital. She was here 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. She knew what she was doing, and she was kind. I folded my hands. She lasted 4 months. Brandon let her go in February of 2021 and replaced her with a succession of people who charged less and delivered less. The last one, a young man named Tyler, came 3 times a week for 2 hours and spent most of that time on his phone in the kitchen. "And Diana?" Stella asked. The name sat between us with its own particular weight. "Diana," I said carefully, "is a woman who understood from the beginning that I was an inconvenience she had not signed up for." She never said that directly. She did not need to. It was present in every interaction. The way she placed my dinner tray on the table without making eye contact. The way she spoke about me on the phone in the next room in the third person, as though I were furniture that could not hear. I looked at the window. Once in the fall of 2022, I asked her if she could open the window in my room. It was warm, and I could not reach the latch from the chair. She told me she would do it later. She did not do it. 3 days passed. I finally asked Brandon. He told me to stop bothering Diana about small things. Stella pressed her lips together so hard they went pale. "There was one evening," I continued, "in January of last year. I heard Brandon on the phone in his office. He did not know I had moved my chair into the hallway. He was talking to someone, a friend perhaps, and he said, and I remember this precisely because I wrote it down that same night, he said the old man upstairs is going to be a problem eventually, but right now he's manageable." I looked at Stella. Manageable. That was the word he used. For his father. Stella stood up from the table abruptly. She walked to the kitchen window and stood with her back to me for a moment. Her shoulders rigid, her breathing deliberate and controlled. "Stella," I said. "Give me a second," she said. Her voice was tight as a wire. "Take the time you need." She turned around after a moment. Her eyes were dry, but her face had the particular look of someone who has swallowed something that burned on the way down. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" she asked. "Grandpa, I would have come. You know I would have come." "I know," I said, "but I needed to be certain. Not just certain of what Brandon was doing, certain of what I was willing to do about it." I met her eyes across the kitchen. "Now I am. I want to show you something I told Stella on the morning of December 27th. Something I have not shown anyone since Eleanor died." She looked up from her coffee. "Should I be worried?" "No," I said. "But you might want to sit down when you see it." I pushed back from the table and moved toward the hallway, and Stella followed without another word. We went to my office, the small room at the back of the house that Brandon had never once entered in 5 years because I had made it quietly and consistently clear that it was not his space. I unlocked the door with the key I kept on a chain around my neck, the same chain that held my wedding ring since Eleanor died, and I pushed the door open. The room smelled like cedar and old paper. One wall held bookshelves floor to ceiling packed with ledgers, nautical charts, and engineering manuals going back to 1978. On the desk sat a flat wooden box 18 inches long that Eleanor had given me for our 25th anniversary. Inside it, I had kept every significant document related to the New Haven Harbor property for the past 35 years. I lifted the box onto the desk and opened it. "Come here," I said. Stella came to stand beside me. I lifted out the first document, a topographical survey map of New Haven Harbor, dated 1989, the year I bought the first parcel. The paper was stiff with age, but the lines were still clear. I spread it flat on the desk and pointed to a section of waterfront marked in red pencil. "This is where I started," I said. 2.1 acres. Contaminated soil, derelict structures, no utilities. I paid $47,000 for it, and everyone I knew thought I had lost my mind. "But you hadn't," Stella said. "I had a theory," I said. Waterfront industrial land in southern Connecticut was being systematically undervalued because people were looking at what it was not what it could become. I was patient. Patience is the cheapest tool a builder owns. I pulled out the next document, another survey dated 1994. Second parcel, 1.8 acres, 62,000. Then another. Third parcel, 2001, 2.3 acres, 104,000. I laid them out in a row across the desk. By 2008, I had assembled 6 contiguous acres of deep-water accessible waterfront in New Haven Harbor. Total acquisition cost over 19 years was approximately $380,000. Stella studied the maps, carefully tracing the outline of the assembled property with one finger. And now, I reached into the box and withdrew a manila envelope unsealed thick with paper. I handed it to her. She opened it and pulled out the top document. It was a letter, 3 pages printed on heavy cream stock, with a letterhead that read, "Meridian Energy Solutions, headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut." I watched her read. I watched her eyes move down the first page, then stop, then go back and read the same paragraph again. "George," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "This says 30 years. A ground lease," I said. "That is a contractual arrangement in which the landowner retains ownership of the property, but leases the land itself to a tenant for an extended term. Meridian Energy wants to construct an offshore wind energy coordination facility on the New Haven Harbor site. They need deep water access and substantial acreage. My property provides both." I paused. "The proposed lease term is 30 years. The total contract value over that term is $42 million. Stella set the letter down on the desk. She pressed both palms flat against the surface and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Her breathing was slow and deliberate, the way it got when she was absorbing something large. $42 million, she said. "The negotiations have been ongoing for 14 months, I said. "Victor has been handling the legal correspondence. Danny Parker, my foreman at the yard for the past 11 years, has been managing the property and facilitating the site visits Meridian requested." I folded my hands. "The contract is ready to sign. I have been waiting for the right moment." "Brandon has no idea," Stella said. It was not a question. Brandon walked past that property every time he drove to his office on Water Street and saw a chain-link fence and some old equipment sheds, I said. "He saw what he expected to see. He never asked. In 30 years, he never once asked what his father had actually built." Stella straightened and looked at me. There was something in her expression I had not seen often, a particular combination of anger and grief and fierce protectiveness that reminded me so sharply of Eleanor that my chest tightened without warning. "He was going to take it," she said, "through the conservatorship. Once he had financial control over you, he would have had authority over this property too. He could have signed contracts, restructured agreements, redirected payments." "Yes," I said. "He would have had that authority, and he would have exercised it without understanding for one moment what he actually held in his hands." Stella picked up the Meridian letter again and looked at the number on the final page. $42 million payable over 30 years in quarterly installments, with an initial signing payment of $2 million upon execution of the lease. "When did you plan to sign?" she asked. I looked at the survey maps spread across Eleanor's desk. 35 years of patience laid out in paper and red pencil lines. "January 2nd, I said. "After everything is finished." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Danny Parker, I need to talk to him." "He is expecting your call," I said. "He has been expecting it for 2 weeks." Stella called Danny Parker at 8 o'clock on the morning of December 28th, and I sat across the kitchen table and listened to one side of a conversation that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man Danny had become in 11 years of working my yard. I had hired Danny in 2013. He was 23 years old, fresh out of a vocational program at Gateway Community College in New Haven, with calloused hands and the particular kind of focused quietness that serious young men sometimes carry before the world teaches them to be loud. He showed up the first morning 20 minutes early, looked around the yard without saying anything for a long time, and then asked me which equipment needed servicing first. I told him the hydraulic lift on the east dock. He nodded and got to work. He did not ask about pay rates or lunch breaks or what time he could leave. He just started. 11 years later, he was 34, and he ran the yard the way Eleanor had run our household, with a calm authority that made everything look easier than it was. I could hear his voice through Stella's phone low, and measured the voice of a man who chose his words, the way a carpenter chooses wood for grain and weight, and how long they would hold. Stella had the phone on speaker low volume, the two of us leaning toward it at the kitchen table. "The man showed up on a Tuesday," Danny said. "December 17th. He parked on Water Street and walked the perimeter fence for about 20 minutes. I watched him from the equipment shed. He had a phone out the whole time taking photographs. Systematic. North fence line, east dock, access the deep water pier." "Did he try to come inside?" Stella asked. "He buzzed the intercom once. Said he was a real estate consultant doing a market survey for a client. I told him the property was not for sale and that he needed to leave." A brief pause. "He left, but he sat in his car on Water Street for another 40 minutes before he drove away." "Did you get a plate number?" Stella asked. "Connecticut registration," Danny said. "I texted it to you 2 weeks ago." Stella looked at me. I nodded. The same plate Margaret had written down in her precise librarian's hand on a folded piece of paper. "Danny," I said, leaning toward the phone. "Did he ask you anything before you told him to leave?" A beat of silence. "Yes, sir. He asked 2 things. First, he wanted to know the approximate size of the property and whether the deep water pier was still operational." Another pause, and when Danny spoke again, his voice had a different quality, careful and deliberate. "Second, he asked whether the owner was still actively managing the property or whether someone else was handling decisions." The kitchen went very quiet. "He asked if someone else was handling decisions," Stella said slowly. "Yes," Danny said. "I told him the owner managed everything personally and that anyone who wanted to discuss the property should contact the owner directly. He did not respond to that. He just thanked me and walked back to his car." I sat back in my chair. The question about who was handling decisions was not a real estate question. It was a legal reconnaissance question, the kind you ask when you are trying to establish whether a conservatorship petition has merit, whether the subject of that petition is still perceived by people close to him as capable of independent decision-making. Brandon had sent someone to my yard to gather evidence that I was not managing my own affairs. "Danny," Stella said, "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "In 11 years of working for my grandfather, Have you ever had reason to believe he was not mentally capable of managing his own business decisions? Danny's answer came without hesitation, the way answers come when they do not require any construction. No, no, never. Mr. Harrison calls me every other Thursday morning at 7:30 to go over the yard's operational status. He asks specific questions. He remembers every detail from the previous call. Last month, he caught a discrepancy in the equipment maintenance log that I had missed. A pause. He is the sharpest man I have ever worked for, and I have worked for a lot of men. I looked out the kitchen window at the maple tree in the yard, patient and bare in the December cold. 11 years. Danny had shown up 20 minutes early on his first morning 11 years ago, and he had never once given me a reason to doubt him. "Thank you, Danny," I said. "Mr. Harrison." His voice shifted, became something less formal and more direct. "I want you to know something. When that man was at the fence taking photographs, I felt it. Something wrong about the whole thing. I did not know what was happening exactly, but I knew it was not right." A brief pause. "Whatever you need from me. Testimony, documentation, being present somewhere. You say the word." "I know," I said. "And I will." After Stella ended the call, we sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen. Outside, a thin winter sun was working its way through the cloud cover, casting pale light across the snow in the yard. "He asked who was handling decisions," Stella said. She pressed 2 fingers against her temple, her jaw tight. "Brandon wasn't just filing paperwork. He was building a factual record, trying to establish that you were already functionally dependent before the petition was even filed." "Yes," I said. "That is a more sophisticated strategy than I gave him credit for." "Brandon is not unintelligent," I said. "He is simply without conscience. Those are 2 very different problems." I looked at her steadily. "Call Victor. Tell him about the reconnaissance visit. He needs to know the scope of what Brandon was building." Stella was already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling him right now." Victor Hale arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, carrying his leather briefcase in one hand and a paper bag from Atticus Bookstore Cafe on Chapel Street in the other. He set the briefcase down inside the door, held up the bag and said, "Turkey sandwiches and black coffee. I assumed you hadn't eaten properly today." That was Victor. 25 years of knowing the man, and he had never once arrived anywhere empty-handed. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered with silver hair. He kept short, and reading glasses he wore on a chain around his neck that Eleanor had always said made him look like a distinguished professor rather than a lawyer. He had grown up in Bridgeport, the son of a longshoreman, and he had put himself through University of Connecticut Law School on a combination of academic scholarships and weekend construction work. He understood what it meant to build something with your hands and then have someone try to take it from you. That was, I had always thought, why he was so good at protecting the things other people built. He shook my hand first, then Stella's, then sat down at the kitchen table and opened the paper bag with the efficiency of a man who understood that food was logistics, and logistics mattered. "Tell me about the reconnaissance visit," he said, unwrapping a sandwich. Stella laid out everything Danny had told us that morning. The man at the fence, the photographs, the 2 specific questions about property size and who was handling decisions. Victor listened without interrupting, eating his sandwich steadily, his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. When Stella finished, Victor set down the sandwich and picked up his coffee. "The question about decision-making authority is the important one," he said. "Brandon was trying to establish external corroboration for his conservatorship claim. If a third party, someone with no family connection, could testify that they had sought to do business with the property and been redirected to someone other than George that would support the argument that George was no longer the functional decision-maker. He looked at me. But Danny told them the opposite. Danny told them I managed everything personally, I said, which means that line of evidence not only fails to support Brandon's petition, it actively contradicts it. Victor allowed himself a small, precise smile. Brandon spent money building a case and ended up building yours instead. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder dark green, thick with paper. He set it on the table and opened it flat. "Onto George Harrison Revocable Living Trust," he said. "Executed December 15th, 2024. Let me explain the structure." He turned the folder toward me and Stella. "A revocable living trust is a legal document that places your assets under the management of a trustee during your lifetime and distributes them according to your instructions after your death. Unlike a will, a trust does not go through probate court, which means the distribution of assets is private, faster, and significantly harder to contest." He looked at Stella. "You are named as sole trustee. That means you have full legal authority to manage, protect, and distribute the assets held in this trust, according to George's instructions." "What assets are in the trust?" Stella asked. "The New Haven Harbor property," Victor said. "All investment and savings accounts. The family home." He turned a page. "Combined value approximately $44 million, including the anticipated signing payment from Meridian Energy." Stella pressed her lips together and breathed carefully through her nose. "See, Brandon is named nowhere in this document," Victor continued. "Not as trustee, not as beneficiary, not as successor. His power of attorney is also hereby revoked effective the date of trust execution." He looked at me. "George, I need to confirm for the record. You signed this document on December 15th with full understanding of its contents and implications." "I did," I said. "I was examined by Dr. Pierce on December 14th, the day before signing. He documented my cognitive status formally. Score of 29 out of 30 on the standard mental status examination, which places me in the normal range for a man 20 years younger." Victor nodded. "2 independent physician certifications plus Danny Parker's testimony, plus the email record showing Brandon orchestrating this before any formal legal proceeding was initiated." He closed the folder. "Brandon cannot file a conservatorship petition that will survive its first hearing. His own actions have undermined every argument he intended to make." He picked up his coffee again and looked at me across the table with the expression he had worn since the first time I walked into his office 25 years ago. The expression of a man who had seen enough bad outcomes to understand exactly how much a good outcome was worth. "George," he said, "I want to ask you something, not as your attorney." "Go ahead." "Are you prepared for what happens when Brandon walks through that door on the 31st? I thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. I thought about the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle on this street, the young man I had watched graduate from law school with a pride that had filled my chest until it ached. I thought about the man who had called me the old man upstairs and sent a stranger to photograph my land." "Yes," I said. "I have been preparing for this for a long time." Victor nodded slowly. He reached into his briefcase one more time and placed a small device on the table. A USB hub, compact matte black. "This connects to the 4 cameras we installed in the common areas of the house on December 23rd, he said. "Living room, kitchen, hallway, front entry. All footage is time-stamped and stored on a remote server. Admissible in Connecticut court." Stella looked at the device, then at me. "You had cameras installed before I even got here." "I told you," I said quietly. I had been preparing for a long time. Victor stood, packed his briefcase, and shook both our hands. At the door, he paused and turned back. Men like Brandon, he said, always come back when they think they have won. He picked up his briefcase. Make sure you're ready. I want to show you something else, I told Stella after dinner on the evening of December 29th. She was washing the dinner plates, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of decaf. And when she heard the particular tone in my voice, she turned off the faucet and dried her hands without being asked. I reached into the drawer beside the refrigerator and produced a phone. Not my regular phone, the one Brandon had set up for me 2 years ago, with the large font display and the simplified interface he had configured so I could not change the settings. This one was a simple prepaid device, a basic model from a drugstore on Whitney Avenue that Stella had left for me during a visit in late November. She had shown me how to use the video function. I had been using it every night since. I set it on the table between us. How many? Stella asked. She sat down across from me, her hands folded on the table, her posture very straight. 19 recordings, I said. Over 3 weeks. I deleted the ones with nothing significant. 11 remain. She looked at the phone. Are you ready to watch them? I have already watched them, I said. Multiple times. I need you to watch them now. I opened the first video. The timestamp read November 29th, 7:43 in the evening. The angle was from the corner of my bedroom dresser, slightly elevated, capturing the doorway and most of the room. The image quality was modest but adequate. Clear enough. Brandon appeared in the doorway. He was dressed for dinner jacket on keys in hand. He looked across the room at me without crossing the threshold. His expression was the expression of a man reviewing an item on a checklist. Dinner's on this counter, he said. Diana and I are going out. Your pills are next to the plate. He did not wait for a response. He turned and walked away. His footsteps receded down the hallway, then the stairs, then the front door opened and closed. The video continued for 4 more seconds, capturing the empty doorway and the sound of a car engine starting in the driveway. Stella watched the screen without moving. I opened the second video, December 3rd, 6:15 in the morning. My bedroom again, this one capturing the hallway through the open door. Brandon's voice loud and sharp coming from his office down the hall. He was on the phone. I had positioned myself near the doorway to improve the audio. His words were clear. Look, the timeline is the timeline. Bellamy does the evaluation, Marsh files the petition, and by February, we have the court order. The New Haven property alone justifies the whole thing, and he has no idea what it's worth. A pause. Then lower, but still audible. He won't fight it. He doesn't have the resources or the people to fight it. The old man thinks I'm his caretaker. He trusts me. Stella's jaw tightened so I could see the muscle working beneath her cheek. I opened the third video. December 7th, 8:50 in the evening. This one I had recorded from the hallway itself, phone held low against my leg, camera facing backward. It captured the kitchen. Diana stood at the counter plating my dinner. 1 chicken breast plain, a small portion of instant mashed potatoes, a glass of tap water. She carried the tray down the hallway and pushed open my bedroom door with her shoulder. She set the tray on my bedside table and looked at me with the flat, uninflected gaze she reserved exclusively for interactions with me, the look of someone performing a task they found entirely beneath them. Dinner, she said. She walked out without closing the door behind her. From downstairs came the sound of the television, a cooking show, laughter, the particular warm sounds of a household that had decided one of its members did not belong to it. I closed that video. Grandpa, Stella said. Her voice was very controlled, the way it got when the thing she was feeling was too large for ordinary expression. "There are 8 more," I said, "but I want you to see the last one." I scrolled to the final video. December 20th. 4 days before Christmas. The timestamp read 11:17 at night. I had placed the phone on the hallway windowsill, angled toward my office door, which I had left slightly open. Inside the office, my desk lamp was on, casting a rectangle of yellow light into the dark hallway. Diana appeared at the end of the hallway. She moved quietly, glancing toward the staircase first, then toward my bedroom door. She crossed to my office and pushed the door open further, stepping inside. She went directly to my desk. She opened the center drawer, looked through it quickly, closed it. Opened the right drawer, looked through it, closed it. Then she lifted several folders from the desktop, looked at the labels, set them down. She picked up one folder, opened it, read for approximately 30 seconds, and set it back exactly as she had found it. She left the office, pulled the door back to its previous position, and walked back down the hallway. I stopped the video. The kitchen was very quiet. "She was looking for the will," Stella said. "Yes," I said. "She found the folder labeled Estate Documents." "Yes, but that folder contains only the documents I wanted her to find. An outdated draft from 2019 that names Brandon as sole beneficiary." I looked at Stella across the table. "Victor helped me prepare that decoy in early December. Diana read it and put it back. 2 days later, Brandon booked the trip to Aspen." Stella stared at me. Something moved across her face that was not quite disbelief and not quite admiration, but lived in the territory between them. "You let her find the fake will," she said. "You gave Brandon a reason to believe he had already won." "A man who believes he has already won," I said, "stops being careful." The fire had been burning for 2 hours by the time Stella asked me the question I had been expecting since she arrived. We were sitting in the living room, the two of us, in the particular stillness that comes over a house the night before. Something large is going to happen. I had built the fire myself, which Stella had watched without comment, understanding instinctively that some things a man needs to do with his own hands, regardless of the circumstances. Outside, snow was falling again, the third snowfall of the week, soft and unhurried against the dark windows. The clock on the mantel read 9:47. Stella was sitting in Eleanor's chair, the wingback with the green upholstery that had been reupholstered twice in 40 years, and that I had refused to replace after Eleanor died, because it still held somehow the particular shape of her. She had her feet tucked under her and a mug of tea in both hands, and she had been quiet for a long time. "Grandpa," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "I have never answered you any other way," I said. She looked at the fire. "Are you doing all of this because you're angry or because you want things to be right?" I had been asked harder questions in my life. Not many. I turned the question over carefully before I answered it, the way I had always turned important questions over, giving them the weight they deserved. When Brandon was 4 years old, I said he fell off his bicycle on the driveway and split his chin open on the asphalt. Deep cut, a lot of blood, the kind of injury that looks worse than it is, but frightens a child badly. I carried him inside and Eleanor cleaned the wound, and I held his hand the entire time he cried. I paused. He cried for 20 minutes, and I sat there with my hand around his, and I thought I would carry every injury this boy ever has if I could. I would take every one of them from him and carry them myself. I looked at Stella across the firelight. That feeling does not disappear, even now. That is the most painful part of all of this. Not what he did, the fact that I would still carry it for him if I could. Stella's eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together and held them. So no, I said. I am not doing this because I am angry. Anger is too simple for what I feel. I am doing this because silence is not the same as peace. I spent 5 years being silent, and it did not protect me, and it did not help Brandon, and it did not honor Eleanor, who spent 40 years building something worth protecting. I looked at my hands. Eleanor would have acted sooner. She would have looked Brandon in the eye the first time he spoke to me with contempt, and she would have said, "That is not how we do things in this family," and she would have meant it, and he would have known she meant it. I exhaled. I waited too long. I am not waiting anymore. Stella set her mug down on the side table. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and looked at me directly, her grandmother's eyes in the firelight. "What do you want to happen?" she asked. "After the 31st? After Victor? After all of it? What do you actually want?" The question opened something in my chest that had been closed for a long time. "I want Brandon to understand what he did," I said. "Not to suffer for it. Not to be punished for it in the way that satisfies an audience. I want him to understand it the way you understand a burn from the inside, from the place where it actually happened." I paused. "That is why I am leaving the door open." "The shipyard," Stella said. 2 years, I said. "Working the yard. Actual work, physical work. The kind of work that teaches you something about what things cost and what things are worth. Not as punishment, as education." I looked at the fire. "Whether he walks through that door is his decision. I am not going to force it. I am not going to beg him. I am simply going to leave it open and let him choose who he wants to be." Stella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And if he doesn't choose it, then he doesn't choose it," I said. "And I will grieve that for the rest of my life. But I will not grieve it in silence, and I will not grieve it alone." I looked at her. "That is the other thing I have decided. I have spent too many years grieving alone in this house." The fire crackled and shifted, a log settling deeper into the grate. Stella reached up and touched the corner of her eye quickly, a single efficient gesture, and then folded her hands back around her mug. "Shh, Eleanor would have liked this version of you," she said quietly. The words hit me somewhere below the sternum, sharp and clean and true. "She would have said I took too long to get here," I said. Stella smiled, the full, real smile that reached her eyes. "She would have said exactly that. And then she would have made everyone coffee and told you to stop being dramatic." I laughed. A real laugh, the first one in longer than I could account for, rising out of me unexpectedly and filling the quiet room. Stella laughed with me, and for a moment the house felt the way it had felt when Eleanor was alive, full and warm and inhabited by people who belonged to each other. The clock on the mantel moved to 10 o'clock. "Tomorrow," Stella said. "Tomorrow," I said. She stood and picked up her mug, and at the doorway she turned back. The firelight caught her face at an angle that made her look for just a moment startlingly like her grandmother. "Grandpa," she said, "whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know something. Tell me. You gave me back something I thought families only had in stories." She held my gaze. "A person who actually shows up." I could not speak for a moment. I nodded instead, which she understood because she was Eleanor's kind of person, and Eleanor had always understood the things I could not say. She went upstairs. I sat by the fire until it burned down to coals, and I talked to Eleanor the way I always talked to her, when no one was listening, quietly and without embarrassment, telling her what was coming and asking her to stay close. Before I reveal the next shocking truth, leave a comment with 111 or ready. so I know you're still here with me. And please note, the following part of the story contains some fictionalized elements added for dramatic effect. If you prefer strictly non-fictional content, feel free to stop the video right here. I heard the cars at 3:14 in the afternoon. First Brandon's black Audi, then Diana's white Lexus tires crunching over the packed snow on the driveway, in the particular sequence I had heard 10,000 times over 5 years. I was sitting in the living room in my wheelchair, exactly where I always sat, exactly as I always looked. The fire was low. The television was off. My hands were folded in my lap. Victor had arrived at 8 that morning and had been in my office with the door closed for 7 hours. He had brought his own coffee in a thermos and had not emerged once. Before he went in, he had checked the camera system on his laptop, confirmed all 4 feeds were recording cleanly to the remote server, and shaken my hand without saying anything unnecessary. That was Victor. He understood that preparation was its own form of conversation. Stella was in the kitchen. She had made soup again, the same chicken soup she had brought on Christmas Eve, and the smell of it had been moving through the house all afternoon. She had done that deliberately. She wanted the house to smell like something that belonged to me when they walked in. The front door opened. Brandon came in first. He was wearing a ski jacket, expensive charcoal gray, with a logo I did not recognize, and his face was tan from a week in the mountains. He carried a large duffel bag over one shoulder, and he was already looking at his phone when he crossed the threshold. He registered the room in a single sweeping glance, the way he always did, cataloging rather than seeing. And then his eyes found Stella standing in the kitchen doorway, and he stopped moving entirely. 4 seconds of absolute stillness. Then his face rearranged itself into something hard and bright and dangerous. "What is she doing here?" he said. Not to me. To the room. Diana came in behind him, pulling a wheeled suitcase. She saw Stella and her hand tightened on the suitcase handle, but her expression did not change. Diana was better at control than Brandon had ever been. It was one of the things about her I had observed most carefully over 5 years. "Hello, Brandon," Stella said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Hello, Diana. How was Aspen?" Brandon dropped his duffel bag on the floor. "Dad." He looked at me for the first time since entering the house. "Why is she here? She doesn't have a key to this house." "I gave her a key," I said. "You gave her a key." He repeated it with the particular emphasis of a man who had already decided what the situation meant and was simply arranging the words to fit his conclusion. "While we were gone." "Dad, she's been here all week, hasn't she?" It was not a question. His voice was rising. "She came here and she's been in this house with you for a week and nobody told me." "There was no obligation to tell you," I said. Brandon's face went through several things in quick succession. I watched it happen. The calculation, the anger, the decision. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Brandon," Stella said. "Think carefully about what you're doing. I'm calling the police." He said, his voice loud and clipped. "Stella drove here without permission, entered this house, and has been isolating my father from his family for a week. That is elder abuse. That is a crime." He pressed the phone to his ear. "And when they get here, they're going to remove her, and I'm going to make sure she never comes near this house again." Diana set her suitcase against the wall and sat down on the edge of the couch. She was looking at me now, not at Brandon and not at Stella, just at me. Her expression had shifted into something I could not immediately name, something that was not quite the cold flatness I knew from the videos, but something more complicated and less certain. I met her eyes and held them. Brandon was speaking to the dispatcher, giving the address. explaining the situation with the brisk confidence of a man who believed entirely in the version of events he was constructing. I listened to him describe his elderly and vulnerable father, his granddaughter, who had inserted herself without permission, the urgent need for intervention. He used the words confused and manipulated. He used the phrase without capacity to recognize what is happening. He spoke for 4 minutes. Then he hung up and looked at me with an expression that was trying very hard to be concern and was not quite making it. "Dad," he said. His voice dropped to something softer, the voice he used when he wanted something. "I know she's family. I know you care about her. But Stella has taken advantage of you, and we are going to sort this out properly." "Brandon," I said. "Just let me handle this." "Brandon," I said again. The second time with enough weight that he stopped talking. "Sit down." He did not sit down. But he stopped talking, which was sufficient. We waited 11 minutes for the police. Brandon spent them pacing the length of the living room, phone in hand, periodically looking out the front window. Diana did not move from the couch. Stella stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms at her sides, and her face composed the face of someone who had done everything that needed to be done, and was now simply waiting for the world to catch up. I sat in my wheelchair and watched my son pace and thought about a boy on a bicycle, and a cut chin, and 20 minutes of crying, and a father who had believed with his whole heart that he could carry every injury for this child if given the chance. The doorbell rang. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both young, both in uniform, both carrying the careful, professional neutrality of people trained to walk into unknown domestic situations without assumptions. The woman spoke first. "We received a call about a disturbance at this address," she said. "Is everyone all right?" Brandon stepped forward immediately, hand extended. "Officer, thank you for coming. I'm Brandon Harrison. This is my father's home. This woman," he gestured toward Stella, "entered without permission and has been here for a week without our knowledge. I believe she has been manipulating my father." The officer looked at me. "Sir, is that your granddaughter?" "Yes," I said. "I invited her here. She has a key I gave her." Brandon's mouth tightened. "Dad, you need to let me explain the situation." "Mr. Harrison." The officer was still looking at me. "Are you here of your own free will? Are you comfortable?" Before I could answer, the door to my office opened. Victor Hale stepped into the hallway, briefcase in hand, reading glasses on 7 hours of preparation behind his eyes. "Good afternoon," he said, looking at the officers with the calm authority of a man who had been expecting exactly this moment. "My name is Victor Hale. I am Mr. George Harrison's attorney of 25 years. He looked at Brandon. "I've been waiting for you." Victor set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with the unhurried precision of a man who had been preparing for this moment for 6 weeks. Brandon turned to face him with the expression of someone who had just realized the room had changed shape. "Who are you?" he said, though I could see in his eyes that the sight of the briefcase and the charcoal suit and the reading glasses on the chain had already begun to answer that question in ways he did not want answered. "Victor Hale," Victor said pleasantly. "I have been George's attorney for 25 years. I've known him since before you graduated high school, Brandon. We've met twice. I don't expect you to remember." He looked at the 2 officers. "I want to thank you both for coming. As it happens, your presence here is going to be quite useful, though perhaps not in the way Mr. Harrison anticipated when he called you." The female officer, whose nameplate read Officer Davis, looked between Victor and Brandon with the calibrated patience of someone trained to let situations develop before reaching conclusions. "What's going on here, counselor?" Victor reached into his briefcase and produced a folder. dark green, thick. He set it on the coffee table and opened it flat. Over the past 11 weeks, Brandon Harrison has been engaged in a coordinated effort to obtain legal control over his father's finances and assets through a fraudulent conservatorship petition. I have documentation of each step of that effort, which I am going to present now. He looked at Brandon. You are welcome to sit down. Brandon did not sit down. His jaw was tight and his hands were at his sides, and he was doing the calculation behind his eyes. The rapid assessment of a man trying to determine how much of what he had done could be explained away and how much could not. Diana sat on the couch. She had not moved since the officers arrived. She was watching Victor with an expression I could not fully read, something between resignation and relief, as though a door she had been leaning against for a long time had finally been opened from the other side. Victor turned his laptop toward the officers. These are emails recovered from a shared digital folder. They document communications between Brandon Harrison attorney Gerald Marsh, notary Philip Corso, and psychiatrist Howard Bellamy beginning November 4th of this year. He pointed to the screen. In this email, Brandon directs his attorney to file a conservatorship petition before the new year and identifies my client's assets by account number and approximate value. In this subsequent email, Dr. Bellamy confirms he will conduct a capacity evaluation on December 17th and instructs Brandon to ensure the subject has not been coached or prepared. Victor paused. The subject, to be clear, is George Harrison. Dr. Bellamy's letter refers to my client as the subject. Officer Davis leaned forward to read the screen. Her partner, Officer Reyes, had his notepad out. This is fabricated, Brandon said. His voice was tight but controlled. Those emails are out of context. I was exploring options to help my father. That is not illegal. Exploring options, Victor repeated mildly. He reached into the folder and produced a bank statement. This is a Wells Fargo account statement for George Harrison's personal savings account. On November 19th, $15,000 was withdrawn by electronic transfer to an account held by Gerald Marsh Law Associates. The transfer was authorized using the power of attorney Brandon holds over his father's finances. He set the statement on the table. Brandon used his father's own money to pay the legal fees for the petition being filed against his father. Under Connecticut law, that constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty, which is a civil violation, and potentially fraudulent conversion of assets, which is criminal. Brandon's control cracked slightly at the edges. Dad. He turned to me. Tell them I manage your finances because you asked me to. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. I looked at my son across the room. I kept my voice very quiet. I have nothing to add to what Victor is presenting. Victor reached into the briefcase again and produced a second folder. Red this time. This is the psychiatric evaluation submitted by Dr. Howard Bellamy in support of the conservatorship petition. It contains specific clinical findings regarding George's cognitive capacity. He paused. It also contains findings that directly contradict the results of an independent evaluation conducted by Dr. Alan Pierce on December 14th. Dr. Pierce's independent evaluation, which I have here, documents full cognitive integrity. My client answered every assessment item correctly save one, placing him well within normal range and frankly above average for his age group. I will let the officers draw their own conclusions about which evaluation deserves more weight. He looked at Officer Davis. One of these evaluations was conducted by my client's physician of 6 years, who examined him in person with full medical history. The other was conducted by a psychiatrist hired 11 weeks ago by the man seeking to control his assets who met my client once for 45 minutes. He let that sit for a moment. I have submitted both documents to the Connecticut Department of Public Health for review of Dr. Bellamy's professional conduct. Brandon took a single step forward. This is a setup. Stella came here and poisoned him against his own family. She has been here for a week, and she has manipulated a vulnerable old man into Brandon. Victor's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. I would encourage you to be very careful about what you say in front of two law enforcement officers in the next few minutes. He reached into the briefcase one final time and produced a small laptop. He opened it, tapped several keys, and turned the screen toward the room. 4 camera feeds appeared simultaneously. Living room, kitchen, hallway, front entry, all time-stamped, all recording cleanly. These cameras were installed in this home on December 23rd by a licensed security contractor, Victor said. The home belongs to George Harrison. He authorized the installation. Under Connecticut law, a property owner may record common areas of their own residence without notification to other occupants. He looked at Brandon steadily. We have 11 days of footage. I have reviewed it in its entirety. Officer Davis, I would like to formally request that you accept a copy of this footage as part of your response documentation this evening. Officer Davis straightened. She looked at Brandon, then at me, then at Victor. We'll need to make some calls, she said carefully. Brandon turned to Diana. For the first time all evening, his certainty was entirely gone, replaced by something raw and undefended that I had not seen on his face since he was a boy. Diana looked back at him without moving toward him. Diana, he said. Her name in his mouth like a question he already knew the answer to. She looked down at her hands in her lap and said nothing at all. Brandon was still looking at Diana when I placed both hands on the arms of my wheelchair. Nobody noticed at first. Victor was speaking quietly to Officer Davis near the front entry. Officer Reyes was writing in his notepad. Stella was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms at her sides. Brandon was staring at his wife with the expression of a man watching the last solid thing in his world decline to hold his weight. I pressed my palms flat against the armrests. The leather was cool under my hands, worn smooth in the exact places where my palms had rested for 4 years. I knew every inch of that chair. I knew the particular resistance of the right wheel, the way the footrests needed adjusting every 3 months, the sound it made on hardwood versus carpet. I had spent 4 years learning that chair the way you learn anything you live with long enough. I pushed down. My arms took my weight first. Then my legs, which remembered what they were for, even after 4 years of being told they were not needed, found the floor and pushed back. The motion was slow. It was not graceful, but it was steady, and steady was enough. I stood up. The room did not go silent immediately. Silence arrived in stages the way it does when something happens that the mind needs a moment to process before it can stop generating noise. Victor stopped speaking first. Then Officer Davis turned from him. Then Officer Reyes looked up from his notepad. Then Stella, who already knew who had been there in the kitchen on Christmas morning when I had risen from this same chair for the first time in front of another human being, brought one hand to her mouth and held it there. Brandon turned last. He turned because the silence had a direction, and the direction was me. And when he completed the turn and saw me standing all 6 feet of me in the center of the living room, without the chair, without assistance, without any of the apparatus of diminishment, he had built his entire plan around something happened to his face that I had never seen happen to it before. He went still in a way that was different from shock. It was the stillness of a man whose understanding of a situation has just been revised so completely that his body does not yet know what expression to wear. I looked at my son. I had rehearsed nothing. I had prepared no speech, no pronouncement, no carefully constructed sentence designed for maximum effect. What came out of me was simply the truth in the plainest words I had. You mistook a wheelchair for weakness, son, I said. You always did. Brandon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I have been able to walk for 3 years, I said. Dr. Pierce documented my recovery in full. I chose to continue using the chair because I needed to understand something about the people around me. I needed to see who you were when you believed I could not get up. I paused. Now I know. The sound Brandon made was not quite a word. It began as something and did not finish. His right hand came up toward his face and then dropped back to his side as though he had forgotten what he meant to do with it. His skin, tanned from a week in Colorado, had gone a color beneath the tan that I recognized from when he was a boy, and had done something he understood to be genuinely wrong, not caught wrong, but wrong, the kind that came from inside rather than outside. Diana stood up from the couch. She did not move toward Brandon. She moved to the far end of the room near the window and stood with her back to the wall and her arms crossed over her chest, and she looked at me with an expression that had something in it I had not expected. Not defiance, not calculation. Something closer to shame, the specific shame of a person who has watched something terrible happen over a long period of time and has not stopped it, and is now standing in the room where the accounting is taking place. Stella lowered her hand from her mouth. Her eyes were wet, but her posture was straight, the posture of someone standing at attention for something that mattered. Officer Davis spoke carefully. Mr. Harrison, for the record, are you telling us that you have been ambulatory, meaning capable of walking independently during the period covered by these conservatorship proceedings? Yes, I said. I have documentation from Dr. Alan Pierce confirming my physical recovery and my decision made of my own free will to continue using the wheelchair during that period. Victor has those documents. Victor produced them from the green folder without being asked. Brandon found his voice then. It came out stripped of the confidence and the calculation and the careful performance of concern, and what was left underneath was something younger and raw and almost unrecognizable. Dad, he said. Just that. Just the word by itself without anything attached to it. I looked at him for a long moment. My son. 42 years old, standing in the living room of the house he had grown up in the wreckage of a plan that had failed completely, saying my name in a voice I had not heard from him since he was a child. I know, I said quietly. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was simply an acknowledgement that I understood what the word cost him and that I had heard it. Officer Davis stepped forward. Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you to come with us to answer some questions. She was looking at Brandon. Brandon looked at me one final time. His eyes were asking something. His mouth had not yet learned to say a question about whether any of this could be undone. Whether there was a version of the next hour in which he walked back out through the front door. And none of this had happened. I held his gaze and gave him nothing but the truth of my own face. He turned and walked out the front door between the two officers, and the door closed behind him, and the room was very quiet. I stood in the center of it on my own 2 feet in the house I had built. And outside the window, the last light of December 31st was fading over Greenwich. And somewhere above us, Eleanor was either laughing or crying, and I had never been able to tell the difference between the two when it came to the things that mattered most. Stella crossed the room and put her arms around me, and I held on to my granddaughter in the quiet house and did not let go for a long time. The first morning of January 2025 arrived the way New Year's sometimes do in Connecticut. Quietly and without ceremony, a pale gray light coming through the bedroom curtains at 7:14 and the sound of a cardinal in the maple tree outside the same tree I had planted the year Brandon was born. I lay in bed for a few minutes and listened to it. Then I got up, walked to the kitchen without assistance, and made coffee. Stella came downstairs at 8, found me at the kitchen table with the Greenwich time open in front of me, and stopped in the doorway. She looked at me walking upright in my own kitchen on the first morning of the new year, and something moved across her face that she did not try to name, and I did not try to name for her. "Happy New Year, Grandpa," she said. "Happy New Year," I said. "Coffee is on." Victor called at 9:15. He had been at his office since 7, which was not a surprise. Victor processed difficult events by working, which was one of the things that had made him an exceptional attorney for 30 years. "The officers filed their report last night," he said. "Brandon was questioned for 2 hours at the Greenwich Police Department. He was not arrested, but he has been formally advised that he is the subject of an ongoing investigation into elder financial abuse and fraudulent misrepresentation to a court." His attorney, Gerald Marsh, was present for the questioning. A pause. "Marsh is unlikely to continue representing Brandon now that he himself may be subject to Bar Association review for his role in the petition." "And the petition itself?" I asked. "Withdrawn," Victor said. "Marsh filed the withdrawal at 11:59 last night, 11 minutes after the questioning concluded. Whatever Brandon paid him was apparently insufficient motivation to continue." A brief silence. "George, I also want to tell you that the Connecticut Department of Public Health has formally opened an inquiry into Dr. Howard Bellamy's professional conduct. That process will take several months, but the outcome is not uncertain." I looked out the kitchen window at the maple tree. The cardinal was gone. "The eviction notice," I said. "Served this morning at 7:30, Victor said. "Brandon received it at the hotel in Stamford where he and Diana checked in last night. Under Connecticut law, given the documented violations of occupancy terms, specifically the pattern of financial abuse, and the attempt to fraudulently alter the legal status of the property owner, we have grounds for an expedited notice of 3 days rather than the standard 30. His attorney can contest it, but given the circumstances, contesting it would not be advisable." 3 days, I said. "He has until January 4th, Victor said. "I will be available if anything requires immediate attention. Otherwise, I will see you Thursday to begin the formal trust administration process." After I hung up, Stella poured herself a second cup of coffee and sat down across from me. The kitchen was warm. Outside, thin January sunlight was beginning to break through the cloud cover, the particular pale gold of New England winter light that Eleanor had always said looked like old photographs. "How do you feel?" Stella asked. I considered the question honestly. "Like a man who has put down something very heavy," I said, "and is not entirely sure yet what to do with his hands." She nodded. She understood that. At 11:47, my phone rang. The number was Diana's cell phone, which I recognized because I had dialed it perhaps 3 times in 5 years, and each time felt the particular awkwardness of calling someone who lived in the same house and preferred to communicate by text. I looked at the screen for 2 rings. Then I answered. "George." Her voice was different from any version of it I had heard before, stripped of the careful social performance of the management and the distance. What was left was the voice of someone who had not slept and was not pretending otherwise. "I want you to know something before you hear it from anyone else." "Go ahead," I said. "I knew what Brandon was doing," she said. "Not every detail, but enough. I knew about the attorney. I knew about the petition. I knew he had taken money from your account." A pause. I told myself it was not my place to interfere, that it was between a father and a son, that the situation was complicated. Another pause longer. Those were convenient things to tell myself. I know that now. The kitchen was very quiet. Stella had set down her coffee cup and was looking at the table. I am not asking for anything, Diana continued. I am not asking you to help me or to speak on my behalf or to think better of me than you do. I just needed you to know that I understood what happened in that room yesterday, and I am ashamed of my part in it. Her voice thinned on the last sentence, pulled tight by something she was working hard to hold in. That is all I wanted to say. I sat with the phone against my ear for a moment after she finished. Thank you for calling, Diana, I said. George. Her voice was very small. I am sorry. I know, I said. I heard you. I ended the call and set the phone on the table. Stella looked at me. What did she say? She asked. I told her. Stella listened without interrupting the way she always listened, completely and without preparing her response while I was still speaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Are you going to do anything about it? I looked out the window at the yard, at the maple tree standing bare and patient in the January cold, at the snow undisturbed on the lawn, at the particular stillness of the first day of a new year. She made her choice, I said. She lived inside it for 5 years. Now she lives with what it cost. I paused. But it matters that she called. It means that not everyone in that house forgot how to be human. Stella looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, and we sat together in the warm kitchen on the first morning of the new year. And outside the window, the pale gold light of January moved slowly across the snow, and it was enough. Danny Parker called at 7 o'clock on the morning of March 11th, 2025, and I could hear in his voice before he said a single word that it was the kind of morning a man remembers for the rest of his life. Mr. Harrison, he said. They're ready to sign. I was already dressed. I had been up since 5:30, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and the folder of Meridian Energy documents I had read so many times over the past 14 months that the paper had gone soft at the edges from handling. Stella was staying in the guest room that week, which she had taken to doing on important days, appearing without being asked, the way Eleanor used to appear in the doorway of my office when she sensed I needed company, but would not say so. I knocked on her door at 7:15. She opened it already dressed, coat in hand. I heard your alarm, she said. I did not set an alarm, I said. She looked at me. I know. That's how I knew. I stood in the hallway for a moment, after she said that, holding that thought. 31 years of marriage to Eleanor had taught me that the people who truly know you do not need signals. They simply know. Stella had her grandmother's gift for that, the ability to be present for the moment before you understood you needed someone there. We drove to New Haven Harbor in my car, which I was driving again for the first time in 4 years. The wheel felt familiar under my hands, in the way that things feel familiar when you have been away from them long enough to notice the familiarity not taken for granted, but recognized. Stella sat in the passenger seat and did not offer to take the wheel, and I did not offer to give it to her. The March morning was cold and bright, the harbor visible from the highway interchange, the water a hard gray blue under a sky that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. I had driven this route every Sunday morning for 20 years. Highway 95 South Exit 46, the long curve down toward the waterfront, the smell of salt air that reached you even before you could see the water. Eleanor had sat in that passenger seat for 19 of those 20 years, thermos between her knees, reading the Sunday paper while I drove. The 20th year she was gone and I drove alone, and the seat stayed empty, and I did not fill it with anything, because some absences deserve to be honored rather than covered over. Today, Stella sat there. It was not the same. It was not meant to be the same. It was its own thing entirely. Danny was waiting at the gate when we arrived. standing in his work jacket with his hands in his pockets, and when he saw us pull in, he straightened up in the particular way he had when something mattered. He was 34 years old, and he had the hands of a man who used them for real work, and the eyes of a man who paid attention to more than he was asked to. I had hired him when he was 23, barely out of Gateway Community College, showing up 20 minutes early on his first morning without being asked to. 11 years later, he was the same man, only more so. That is the rarest thing in the world. A person who becomes more themselves over time rather than less. He shook my hand with both of his. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." "Good morning, Danny," I said. "Walk with me." The three of us walked the perimeter of the property before we went inside for the signing. My idea. I had wanted to do this once more before the character of the place changed permanently to walk the ground the way I had walked it every Sunday morning for 20 years, with a thermos of coffee and a pair of work boots, and nobody watching. The deep-water pier extended out over the harbor, the old timber dark with age and salt. The equipment sheds along the eastern fence line standing exactly as they had stood since 1993. A pair of herring gulls argued over something at the end of the pier, their voices carrying across the water with the indifference of creatures who had been conducting their business on this harbor long before I arrived, and would continue long after. The morning smelled like brine and cold metal, and the particular mix of oil and lumber that had been the smell of my working life for 30 years. Danny walked beside me and talked about the property the way someone talks about a place they have genuinely loved. The hydraulic lift he had rebuilt in 2019, spending 3 weekends on it, because the replacement part was back-ordered, and he did not want the east dock sitting idle. The section of the north fence they had reinforced after a nor'easter in 2022 tore through and bent 2 posts. The morning last October, when a harbor seal had hauled itself out onto the lowest dock platform and refused to move for 6 hours, and the entire crew had worked around it rather than disturb it. "We took a vote," Danny said, 8-2 in favor of leaving him alone. "Who were the 2?" I asked. "Tyler from the maintenance crew wanted to call animal control, and I think Jenkins voted against just to be contrary." Danny shook his head. "The seal left when he was ready. Slipped back in around 2 in the afternoon. Didn't look back." I thought about that. Creatures who moved on their own schedule, on their own terms, without apology. I listened and walked and let the ground remember my weight. At the eastern end of the pier, I stopped and looked out across the harbor. New Haven spread behind us, the city going about its business in the early morning, and ahead of us the harbor opened toward the Sound, and beyond the Sound, the Atlantic. The same water I had looked at from this spot for 31 years, unchanged and indifferent and enormous. "Danny," I said. "Sir?" I looked at the water before I spoke. I had been thinking about what I wanted to say for several weeks, and I had not found a better way to say it than simply saying it. When Meridian comes in, when the construction starts, and the character of this place changes, I want you to stay on. Not as caretaker, as site manager. Full salary, full benefits, your name on the operational documents." I paused. "You have earned that. 11 years of showing up early and doing more than you were asked. You have earned considerably more than I have given you." Danny looked at the water for a moment. The gulls had moved further down the pier. The city hummed behind us. When he spoke, his voice was careful in the way voices get when they are carrying more than they want to show. "To Mr. Harrison, this job has been the best 11 years of my working life." He stopped, looked down at the old timber planking under our feet, then back out at the water. "I used to think I wanted to work on bigger things, bigger projects, bigger companies, more money. I spent my first 2 years here telling myself this was temporary." He paused. "And then one morning I came in early, and the harbor was doing what it does in October. That light that hits the water at 6 in the morning in October, and I thought there is nowhere else I would rather be. And that has been true every morning since. He looked at me. Whatever you need from me going forward, the answer is yes. I nodded. We stood at the end of the pier in the cold March morning, and that was sufficient. The signing took 40 minutes in the Meridian Energy Conference Room on Crown Street in downtown New Haven, a glass and steel office that felt like a different world from the pier we had just walked. 4 attorneys, 2 executives from Meridian, Victor, Stella, Danny, and me. The documents were 38 pages. I read every one the way I had read every document in my working life completely, and without hurrying, because a man who signs things he has not read deserves whatever follows. When I reached the final signature line, I held the pen for a moment. The total contract value was printed in the header of the final page. $42 million payable over 30 years in quarterly installments. Initial signing payment of $2 million to be transferred to the George Harrison Trust within 10 business days. I thought about the first parcel of land. $47,000. 1989. A 39-year-old man with calloused hands and $11,000 in savings and a theory about what waterfront land in Connecticut would become. I thought about the bank in Bridgeport that had loaned me $22,000 when nobody else would. I thought about the remediation crew I had hired for 2 summers to clean soil that everyone else had written off as worthless. I thought about Eleanor packing a thermos every Sunday morning without complaint for 20 years, asking nothing about where I was going, or why, simply trusting that I knew what I was building toward. I thought about Brandon standing at the gate in 1998, 16 years old, saying it smelled like rust and sweat, and asking if we could get breakfast instead. I thought about the word he had used for me, manageable. I signed my name. The Meridian executives shook my hand. One of them, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who ran their Northeast operations, held my hand for a moment after the shake and looked at me with the directness of someone who meant what she was about to say. Mr. Harrison, I want you to know that this site was our first choice from the beginning. We looked at 11 properties over 14 months. Nothing else came close. She paused. The way this land was assembled, the vision behind it, the patience it took, that is not something you see often. I thanked her. Then I looked at Stella across the conference table, and she looked back at me, and between us passed the particular communication of people who have been through something together that does not require words to be understood. On the drive home, Stella looked out the passenger window at the harbor as we passed it on the highway. The Meridian construction cranes were already visible at the far end of the waterfront, steel frames rising against the pale March sky, patient and purposeful. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "The money. The $2 million. I watched the road ahead of me, the familiar highway, the familiar exits, the familiar shape of the city I had lived in for 74 years. "I already know," I said. "I've known for a long time." She turned from the window and looked at me. "Tell me." I smiled and kept my eyes on the road. "You'll see," I said. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in the middle of June, tucked between a utility bill and a catalog for gardening supplies I had never subscribed to and had stopped wondering about years ago. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope before I recognized anything else about it. Brandon had his mother's handwriting, the same slight leftward lean, the same way of forming the letter G that Eleanor had tried to correct in him when he was 7 years old, and that had persisted unchanged for 35 years afterward. I had not seen that handwriting on anything addressed to me in longer than I could precisely account for. I set the utility bill and the catalog on the kitchen counter and took the letter to the living room. I sat in the chair by the window, the one that got the morning light, and I held the envelope in my hands for a while without opening it. Outside, the June morning was doing what June mornings in Connecticut do, filling the yard with the particular dense green of full summer, the maple tree heavy with leaves, the light coming through them in pieces. A neighborhood dog was barking somewhere 2 streets over. A lawnmower started up and then stopped. I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages handwritten on plain white paper, the kind you buy in a ream at any office supply store. No letterhead, no date at the top, nothing formal. Just words in Brandon's hand, starting at the upper left corner of the first page, the way a person starts writing when they are not thinking about presentation. Dad. I don't know how many times I have started this letter and stopped. I have been trying to write it since January, and I have thrown away more versions of it than I can count. I keep stopping because every version I write sounds like I am explaining myself, and I have spent enough time in the past 6 months understanding that there is no explanation that functions as a substitute for the thing itself. I am not going to explain myself. I am going to tell you what has happened since January, because I think you should know, and because I am tired of being the person who withholds things from you. Diana filed for divorce in February. I did not contest it. The legal fees from January, combined with the loss of 3 major clients who terminated their contracts after the story became public, have left me in a financial position that I do not think I need to describe in detail. You already know what I owe and to whom. I am working with a financial advisor to address it systematically. It will take several years. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport in January. It is on the 4th floor of a building on Broad Street. It is smaller than my office used to be. I have learned that I can live in it. What I have spent the most time thinking about in the apartment on Broad Street in the months since January is not the money or the clients or the divorce. It is the look on your face when you stood up. I have tried to describe that look to myself many times, and I have not been able to find the right words for it. It was not anger. It was not satisfaction. It was something I do not have a name for, something that I think I will spend a long time trying to understand. I don't know if I became this person gradually over years, or if I always was this person and simply had not been tested in a way that made it visible. I have thought about this question every day since January. I don't know which answer is worse. I am not sure it matters which answer is true. I am not writing to ask you for anything. I want to be clear about that. I am not writing because I need money or legal assistance or intervention of any kind. I am writing because I am your son and you are my father, and I have spent 42 years taking that for granted in ways I am only now beginning to understand. I am sorry, Dad, not because of what I lost, because of what I did. I read the letter 3 times. On the 3rd reading, I set it down on my knee and looked out the window at the maple tree for a long time, without thinking about anything in particular, which is a thing I have learned to do in 74 years, to let the mind rest in a moment, without demanding that the moment means something immediately. Then I went to my office, sat at the desk, took out a piece of paper and a pen, and wrote back. I wrote slowly, the way I do everything now, without hurrying. When I was finished, the letter was 1 page. I read it over once, made 1 correction, and folded it in 3rds. The letter said this, that I had received his words, and I had heard them. That I was not able to offer forgiveness as a thing that could be given in a letter, because forgiveness was not a single event, but a direction, and directions took time to travel. That the door to the shipyard was still open. That if he came, he would work alongside the Meridian crew as an ordinary laborer, no title, no special treatment, no acknowledgement of who his father was. That if he stayed for 2 years and worked with his hands and learned what things cost when you build them yourself, then we would talk again about what came next. That the choice was entirely his, and that I would not ask him again. I addressed the envelope to the apartment on Broad Street in Bridgeport. I did not tell Stella I had written back. Not because I was keeping it from her, but because some things a man needs to carry by himself for a while before he is ready to hand them to someone else. Brandon did not reply. 1 week passed, then 2. Then the summer moved into July and the maple tree cast its long afternoon shadow across the front walk, and I stopped checking the mailbox with any particular intention. I had written the letter because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected a specific outcome. I had left the door open because a man who has spent 74 years building things understands that some foundations take longer to set than others, and that the waiting is not the same as the failing. Some evenings I sat by the window in Eleanor's chair and talked to her the way I always did, quietly and without embarrassment. I told her about the letter. I told her what I had written. I asked her what she thought. The maple tree moved in the evening wind. The neighborhood went quiet. I took that as her answer, which was probably not accurate but was sufficient. I woke up on the morning of December 24th, 2025, and lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the house. It was breathing again. That was the only way I knew to describe it, the way Eleanor used to describe it, the particular quality of a house that has people in it who belong there. Stella was in the guest room. I could hear her moving around, the soft sounds of someone getting ready for a day that mattered. Downstairs, the coffee maker I had finally replaced was running through its cycle. The heat was on. The thermostat set to 68, where it had always been when Eleanor was alive, and where it would remain for as long as I lived in this house. I got up without assistance, dressed without hurry, and went downstairs to wait for my granddaughter. She came down at 7:30 in her coat and boots, her hair pulled back, carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder. She looked at me, standing at the kitchen counter pouring coffee, and she smiled the way she smiled when something was exactly what she had expected, and she was glad about it. "Ready?" she said. "Been ready for a year," I said. We drove to Lighthouse Point Park on the eastern shore of New Haven Harbor, where the Sound opens toward the Atlantic, and the winter sky comes down to meet the water in a long, flat line. I had chosen this place deliberately. It was 3 miles from the shipyard. On a clear day, you could see the cranes of the new Meridian construction site from the parking lot, the steel frames rising against the December sky, patient and purposeful. We walked down to the beach. The sand was cold and firm under our feet, packed hard by the winter tides, and the wind off the Sound cut through our coats with the particular honesty of December weather in Connecticut, which does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. I walked without assistance, without a cane, without anything between me and the ground except the soles of my boots. Each step deliberate, each step a fact. Stella walked beside me and did not say anything for a while, and I was grateful for that. She had learned over the course of the past year when I needed to talk and when I needed to simply be somewhere, and she applied that knowledge with the same precision she applied to everything else. We walked to the water's edge and stood looking out at the Sound. "Tell me about the first patient," I said. Stella had been running the administrative side of the Harrison Center for 3 months, overseeing the transition from construction to operation, working alongside Danny and the clinical staff they had assembled. The center had opened its doors on September 15, 2025, in the building that had once been the main operations shed of the Harrison shipyard. The Deepwater Pier remained intact, part of the Meridian lease, but the 6 acres of upland property had been transformed into something I had been imagining in one form or another for the past 3 years. "Her name is Carol," Stella said. 61 years old, former high school teacher from Hamden. Spinal cord injury from a car accident 14 months ago. She came in using a power wheelchair, and she was angry the way people get when they have lost something enormous and have not yet found what comes next. She paused. She walked 40 feet with a walker last Tuesday. Not because she was told to, because she decided she was ready. I looked out at the water. A container ship was moving slowly along the horizon, heading east, its bulk dark against the pale December sky. Eleanor would have wanted to meet her, I said. Eleanor would have brought her a lemon pound cake and stayed for 3 hours, Stella said. I laughed. The same real laugh that had surprised me in this living room a year ago, rising up without permission. She absolutely would have. We stood at the water's edge for a while longer. The wind moved steadily off the sound, and the waves came in and went out with the indifference of things that have been doing the same thing since long before any of us arrived, and will continue long after. I found that comforting rather than diminishing. I always had. Grandpa, Stella said, can I ask you something? You have been asking me things for a year, I said. Don't stop now. Are you happy? I turned the question over. The way I always turned her questions over, giving it the weight it deserved, not reaching for the easy answer, but looking for the true one. A year ago, I had woken up on this same morning in a cold house with a locked wheelchair and an empty refrigerator and a note on the counter that treated me like hired help. I had spent that day and the 6 days that followed doing what I had spent 4 years quietly preparing to do. I had stood up in my own living room in front of my son and 2 police officers and said the truest thing I knew. I had signed my name to a contract that honored 35 years of patience. I had written a letter to my son and left a door open and accepted that I could not control whether he walked through it. I had buried Eleanor 6 years ago. I had sat in a wheelchair I did not need for 4 years. I had watched my son become someone I did not recognize, and had grieved that privately in the dark, the way men of my generation were taught to grieve things alone and without making a sound. And I was standing on a beach in December with the woman who had shown up with soup and a USB drive and a willingness to begin, and 3 miles away, a building that used to smell like rust and machine oil now smelled like antiseptic and new lumber, and the specific kind of hope that belongs to people who are learning to do something again that they thought they had lost. Yes, I said. I am. Stella took my arm, not because I needed steadying, but because she wanted to. And we stood together at the edge of the water while the December light moved across the sound in long pale sheets, and I thought about Eleanor, and I thought about the cardinal in the maple tree, and I thought about a 39-year-old man with $11,000 and a theory about what patience could build. The most painful thing I had told Stella a year ago was not losing the ability to walk. It was realizing that the son I raised had been waiting for me to fall. But standing here with the ocean in front of me and my granddaughter beside me, I understood something I had not known then. The people who stay when you have nothing to offer them, who show up in the cold with soup and do not ask for anything in return, who sit with you by a dying fire and ask the right questions at the right time and know when to be quiet and when to speak. Those people are not a consolation prize for the love that failed. They are the point. They were always the point. Everything else, the money, the contracts, the legal victories, the standing up, all of it had only ever been a way of clearing the ground so that the things that mattered could finally be seen clearly. I looked at my granddaughter. She looked back at me. The wind came off the sound cold and honest and clean. "Same time next year," she said. "Same time next year," I said. I have told you this story because I lived it, and because I believe with everything I have left that silence is not the same as peace. For years I sat in a chair I did not need, waiting for someone to show me who they really were. That was my mistake. Do not make it the way I made it. Do not wait until the house is empty and the photographs are gone and the money has been taken before you decide that you matter. You matter now. You have always mattered. God has a way of sending the right person through the right door at the right moment. For me, that person came carrying soup and a USB drive on Christmas Eve. I almost missed her because I had spent too long expecting nothing. These are the grandpa stories that nobody tells at dinner, the family story that lives behind the smile in the Christmas photograph. Every family has one. Every family story carries a lesson if you are willing to hear it. My personal belief is simple. The people who stay when you have nothing to offer are the only ones worth building anything for. If this grandpa stories touched something in you, leave a word in the comments below. Share this family story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that the truth told quietly can still change something, subscribe to this channel and stay with us. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements created purely for reflection and to carry a message worth hearing. If that is not for you, we understand completely, and we wish you well wherever you go next.